What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Zero Hedge Podcast with me, Robbie the Fire, hosting my good friend, Gene Epstein. Gene Epstein, it's always a pleasure to sit with you.
Rob, it's a pleasure to talk to probably the leader of the green energy movement who does not turn on his air conditioning at 90-degree heat or his heat at 20-degree cold. And you are an example to all those crazy greens like the Obamas who have about 5 homes and turn up the air conditioning and the heat anytime. So amazingly, you're a leader in your field, albeit a reluctant one. Although, Rob, I have to say that the carbon footprint that you leave when you fly around doing your porch tours, it leads a lot. But you spread so much joy on those porch tours that I think it more than compensates, apart from the fact that the one thing we can say that's good about Trump, one of several things we can say actually, is that he's completely hamstringing the green energy movement, by the way. And that's good because the green energy movement is a war on the poor, paramountly a war on the poor, and he's calling an end to that, and that's wonderful news. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? Only that I love you. You run your mouth show. I'm not going to be able to run my mouth because you're on Zero Hedge, but I'll run it anyway. And then what else? I also love the way you, a college-educated guy, I know you went on a 5-year plan, are able to deal with a college dropout like Dave Smith. I think he spent about 5 days in college, or maybe 5 weeks, and then dropped out. You went the whole 5 years. Did you graduate cum laude, Rob?
I definitely did not have any status when I graduated.
What? You didn't? Took a little song. You graduated cum laude, just like I did. But you are a college grad, and you're able to correct Dave Smith, and you guys are a dynamic duo in one of my favorite shows, Part of the Problem. And while I do still feel that Dave in particular, and you as well, 50% of the time when you're commenting on economic data, you don't know your ass from your elbow. And then most of the audience doesn't know which 50% to choose from. Every once in a while you're right, but half the time you're wrong. But you and Dave more than compensate for that. And Dave especially is, in my opinion, the number one libertarian debater. And he does have some competition, but in terms of how many times he's out there and how effective he is, and the fact that, of course, as you know, I did have him at the Seoul Forum twice, and he won, according to Oxford style rating both times, is, of course, a feather in his cap. And apart from that, my God, the people he has on, I can barely bear it on Piers Morgan most of the time, because most of it, I didn't interrupt you. Why are you interrupting me? 4 people shouting at once. But as you know, my Soho Forum, which is always 1 versus 1. And of course, that was a great evening with Dave Smith debating immigration, because you were the warm-up act. So let's see, I guess that's about all I wanted to say by way of introduction, except to say that amazingly enough, for the very first time, I bought a product advertised on a podcast, and that was the Body Brain coffee.
Lewis's product.
With the Dave 20. That's the very first time I bought it, just this morning. And you know why? Because of all the additives might help me with a condition I have called dystonia. So tell Dave, Gene Epstein has bought it. That'll blow it out of the water. But Rob, as you know, I've got so many admirers, perhaps more than you and Dave put together, as you probably know. But you know what's funny? Do you know there was a time when Glenn Greenwald, Tom Woods, and Dave Smith were advertising different coffees? they were competing with each other on coffee advertisement. But the body brain really sounded like something because of the additives that might do a little something for my mental condition. And I'm expecting it in 3 days. But I guess that's it, Rob, for the introduction. But you wanted me to talk about what has happened with the kerfuffle over the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's the following. The Bureau, which tracks unemployment and employment, and as I want to emphasize, their concepts are reasonably good. They cover far, far more of the terrain than you and Dave actually realize. Their definition of unemployment is a usable one, but they have been suffering from a lower response rate to their surveys, and that's why their numbers are a little bit more volatile, a little bit more approximate than they used to be. You really have to look at the trends. You can't really do what the market does and treat each number as though it has the finality of a market close. Do you know that a number of years ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a 0 increase in payroll employment, and the market fell on that day? I, writing a column at the time, said the trends are up. I think there's going to be a revision in a couple of months, and this 0 is going to be revised up. And the market didn't have to fall. I turned out to be right because they do revise a lot. They are imperfect. So you have to look at the trends. Now, what did they show? They showed a slowdown, a severe slowdown in employment gains. Trump got pissed off and fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner and replaced that person with somebody from the right-wing Heritage Foundation that tends to be favorable to Trump. My view is that it's essentially a tempest in a teapot. Specifically, every number is an out-of-focus snapshot. And if you know the numbers the way I do, you know to look at all of the alternative measures that are out there. And all but one of them are private sector. There's the ADP, automatic data processing, that processes tens of millions of payrolls, and they too were reporting a slowdown in the same month, a slowdown in growth. There's the ISM Institute for Supply Management that tracks manufacturing on the one end and services on the other, and they too were corroborating the slowdown in the thing that got Trump pissed off. A slowdown, a noticeable slowdown in job growth. And then there's the other one, which is actually a government number, but it has to do with unemployment insurance claims. 98% of companies are registered with the unemployment insurance run by the Department of Labor. And they send in their numbers on a delayed basis. So it's kind of almost a universal count. So if you look at continued claims, they have a number on how many people make claims and are still on the unemployment insurance rolls. You see a spike going into June and July. And so that continued claims means more people than in the earlier months are holding on to their unemployment insurance, having more difficulty than before finding a job, which is a further corroboration. So therefore, I think that clearly the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as per usual, was if you look at the trends, not the exact numbers, but is showing and correctly showing, because these are all out of focus snapshots that you have to lay side by side. And I had, as I say, 3 private sector services and the unemployment insurance claims, continued claims numbers, all confirming the same thing, a slowdown. And so the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think, had it right. But with that said, I want to broaden the point and say that the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which tracks GDP, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which actually tracks the price index, which is interesting that they do. There's an historical reason for that. And that tracks employment. They do under the circumstances a job that is such that their numbers, and they're comprehensive numbers, by the way, because the last time I spoke to you, you jumped on me and you said, how about part-time employment? How about how long you've been unemployed? How about people who are discouraged? They cover the entire terrain. They're left-wingers left-wing tradition, Rob, and they cover it all, albeit imperfectly. So you have to look at the trends. But of course, I believe that that the government has no business being in charge and dominating the reporting of numbers. What we need, there's no reason why it can't be provided by the private sector. The government could buy it from the private sector, and actually, I will say that I would tell the government just before we have the anarchist revolution that since they have a practically universal count of unemployment insurance claims, then maybe they could keep that one. Even though I'm not too keen on unemployment insurance for a couple of reasons, I think that should be privately gotten, but they should all be abolished. And I guess that opens up, that maybe that would shock the hell out of you, Rob, but maybe it wouldn't. What the hell would the private sector do? Well, the private sector could probably do, if the government weren't crowding it out, could probably do a better job of reporting to us numbers that we're actually interested in getting. And you'd have to pay for it. You'd have to subscribe, but I think there'd be a broad enough market for it so that people could pay. And what I'm also saying when I say pay, I think that when they poll businesses, what do? They send a survey questionnaire to the human resources departments of millions of companies, and they ask them to report how many employees are on your payrolls at the moment. They poll households. I think that if people were paid a little something, a few bucks to comply, they'd have a higher compliance rate. That, of course, would mean it's more expensive to gather the numbers, but I think that we would be interested in those numbers. And then we let the market decide what numbers are businesses really interested in buying, or what we might in turn, buy them. The businesses would be posting them. Maybe we would subscribe. So that's my long-winded story on this. But obviously, the other main point to make is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner doesn't even see the number when the number is turned out. So this is a completely cosmetic change. That new person from Heritage is not going to be able to change their habits. They have reasonably good protocols. A lot of thought has gone into it. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner is just basically a figurehead, doesn't even see the number. It actually, I think it's seen by the Fed chairman sooner than it's seen by the BLS commissioner. Is that person really going to get into the weeds and start firing people and telling people you got to do it this way when probably barely knows how the hell it's done anyway? So it's a tempest in a teapot. But I wanted to broaden the point for libertarians and note that we don't need these agencies. The private sector can provide us, can figure it out, and provide us with the numbers that we need. Although, by the way, I do tend to be a gradualist. I don't want everything abolished right away. Obviously, what Trump has done to some degree is taking the wrong approach. You and I would clearly say that the first place to cut is the Pentagon, big time, and he hasn't done that. Quite the contrary. Anyway, I guess that pretty much answers your question, Rob, unless you have a follow-up.
No, this is what makes you the greatest podcast guest, is that this morning I'm sitting down, I'm trying to come up with all my questions, and we covered all of it. I don't know why I do homework when I'm having you on. We just filled 13 minutes of airtime and covered the whole topic.
That's because we're both smart Jewish guys. I did get an MA, although I never paid for the sheepskin, and so technically I don't even have the MA in economics. But I graduated cum laude from college, also, Rob. And I would have been smarter and better informed if I never went to school. And so that's true of Dave too, by the way. Yeah.
So to give the 30-second recap, Trump was wrong to fire the guy because they were good numbers.
Rob, talk a little slower. Go ahead.
Sorry.
30-second recap.
Yes. 30-second recap. Trump was wrong to fire the lady that he fired because the numbers are as accurate as they typically are. And the change doesn't make much of a difference because the head of the organization doesn't have much powers to reorganize or rig future reporting.
Doesn't see the number when it's released. That's the craziest part. So clearly it was just a cosmetic change. And again, I want to emphasize they are out of focus snapshots. That their response rate is down, and of course they never think in terms of making provision to actually give people a cash inducement to report. If they did that, but private sector would know to do that, would know how to figure it out. So that's the other part of it. So it's a cosmetic change, and as I've mentioned, these out of focus snapshots, this is what I've always done, always said, it's technically called statistical redundancy. Look at every possible snapshot of the same kind of thing and see how they match up. See if you see a pattern. And as I've said, all of the other sources confirm the slowdown in job growth. Yeah, so that's
excellent. All right. So
now you want to talk about manufacturing.
Yeah, the other topic I wanted to delve into is essentially how realistic is bringing back U.S. manufacturing jobs. Yeah. And I did have all sorts of pointed questions, but you put together a full presentation. Yeah. So I'm basically going to let you gear the ship on this because it seems like you kind of have a good outline here. Yeah. But this is us taking a look at Donald Trump. Obviously, people, at least in the news, it seems to be that there's a very favorable idea amongst the U.S. voting public at the idea of manufacturing jobs. And I'm curious to know how many people just want a better paying job, would like more construction jobs, or at what price points things just end up getting automated. So I hand the question to you to kind of maybe take a look at, and then, maybe on the back end, we'll get into tariffs, but just to kind of to start the conversation off. Yeah. We're taking a look here at how practical is it bringing back U.S. manufacturing jobs, and is that actually what people are looking for?
Well, to begin with, that's my first slide, and I guess everybody's looking at it. But for those who are just listening, I took, again, these are approximate numbers, but the trends, that's why I like to take a lot of months. I go back to 2010, and I look at the trend in the average hourly earnings, which is a good metric, hourly earnings. We could look at other ways of looking at it, but we don't have the time. And they have something for production and non-supervisory workers. They again, an approximation, but it tries to cut out the top 20%. The salaried people, the managers in charge, they've been doing this for a lot of years because it's kind of a left-wing tradition. So I'm comparing the trend for the private sector in the service providing industries, including hospitality and restaurants and retail and all the rest of it, and versus the average hourly earnings of the same production non-supervisory workers, the blue collar workers, where there actually is a reasonable definition in manufacturing. And what I've shown there is that for the last 15 years, the average hourly earning in service providing industries has actually been a few dollars higher. It was about the same, and then now it's for the last 10 years, 20 years, it's been a few dollars higher. So it's better to work in a service providing industry. This didn't used to be the case, but also I want to add that manufacturing still has a higher share of unions representing workers than the service producing industries do as a group. And so that would be an advantage that manufacturing would have, because while I think unions do harm overall, they do boost the wages, tend to boost the wages of the workers who are employed by them, and manufacturing pays less. Now, I'm going to get into muddier waters, but still. So let's say manufacturing paid as well. I was on Dave's show, and I had heard Dave say, "Hey, we don't make things anymore." And I tried to point out to Dave that since he didn't go to college the way you and I did, he doesn't understand that that manufacturing is not the only place where you make things. Now, Rob, a little quiz. Name a couple of other places aside from manufacturing where you make things. And of course, we could start with farms. They make things, don't they? They grow stuff. Isn't that making things? This actually these are actually non-farm numbers because they don't do polling on the farm. So we have a huge farming sector, even though of course it only employs 1 to 2% of the population. But of course it's remarkably productive, and so we make things on the farm. And then, are you really trying to suggest that when you walk into a restaurant, or they're not making something? Of course they are. Restaurants are ubiquitous. Secondly, when you walk into a supermarket, there's more than ever, there is prepared foods. The supermarkets are making things as well. And then on top of that, we're going to get to that. Obviously, when you build a house, when you put up an apartment building, aren't you making something? So it's amazing that that a guy as brilliant as Dave Smith, and you were probably there when you heard it, you two guys acted like a couple of bozos, not recognizing that the concept of making things is a little broader than you seem to think, that it only happens in manufacturing. We make a lot. But with that said, you'll see that I have a couple of surprises. I think manufacturing can do better, and I have a couple of quotes which will come up, but we'll get to them in a moment. All I'm trying to say now is that in terms of getting a job, manufacturing can probably improve, but the idea that it's going to do that much better than service-producing industries for the average worker is very dubious, because it's $4 behind right now per hour.
All right. So for at least for anyone who's concerned with, hey, I'd like a job, I think it's fair to assume that most people would like to get paid better than worse. Yeah. And if you could have a construction job that pays you better than standing on a manufacturing line, even amongst the blue collar workers, I think.
Well, that's right. Well, Rob, get to my next slide.
Okay, I will.
Don't I have that in my next slide?
Yeah, but just to put a button on the point, it's for people looking for jobs, we don't necessarily need the manufacturing jobs, nor is there necessarily a demand specifically to work in a factory.
Of course. Okay, just a moment. I would even go further than that, Rob, and I will say, just to shock the hell out of you, that you probably have a better choice if you start working at Walmart. The beginning salaries at Walmart are probably, I just showed service producing pays more among the lower, the non-supervisory people. Obviously, if you the average, I know a whole lot of people, they tend bar until late at night. Of course, it's a little bit exhausting, but not a single one I've ever spoken to has said that they make less than $100,000 a year if they keep with it, and they spend a year or two and they get into a bar where there are a lot of rich drunken people hanging out, and the cash flows, so they walk away. So you want the best job you can get in New York, and you're like Dave, a college dropout. Now Dave does much better what he actually does, but if he wants to fall back on $100,000 a year job, then let him get a job tending bar until 2 a.m, and he'll walk away with $100,000 a year. For example, another example, get a job at Walmart. And now, isn't that a shocker? The starting pay at Walmart is not high, but if you learn the retailing businesses, all of the top people, the top 20% at Walmart, who are managers, supervisors, who get paid pretty well, started at the bottom. Well, most companies do tend to want to promote from within. There's an exception there in a way when you bring in a new employee, you bring in a new person, or what they tend to. Well, I won't even get into that. I'll only saying that. Get a job at Walmart. So that's services. But now let's get to construction. Construction consistently is paid better. although it accounts for, as you'll see in a moment, actually, it accounts for only 6% right now of private sector employment, and manufacturing accounts for 9%. Construction has about the same union representation as manufacturing, so that's not really the advantage. It just pays better. So, as you anticipated, get into a construction job. But we need to do something about both of those sectors, which I'll get into in a moment. However, it's not as though there aren't openings in construction. You'll do better in construction than you will in manufacturing, and you'll do better in many services jobs than you will in manufacturing as well. So let's go on to the next slide. I guess I've made that point. I guess that's the same slide, Rob.
Oh, my bad. I hope I didn't miss something here.
What is that? Oh my God. Oh yeah. I labeled. Oh yeah. Okay. All right. I thought that would be interesting. That's manufacturing employment as a share of all private sector employment. I anticipated a little bit of that. I guess the only interesting story that people should recognize is that we blame everything on China. And also, as I said, as I've done, instead of taking the absolute number of employment of private manufacturing jobs, I've scaled it against the total number. I've left out government, and it's reasonably okay. There's a couple of problems with it, but basically, I've tried to show that that since China entered the World Trade Organization, we've continued to decline in the manufacturing share. But really, there was just as much of a decline in the 90s and 80s. It's been in continual decline since the late 40s. Now, most of the reason for that is, of course, increased productivity. And that does anticipate a point, which is that that whatever we add in terms of manufacturing jobs, given the AI revolution, the robotics revolution, I don't think we can gain a whole lot, but we can gain. And that's and I'm not against that, because you'll see what I can show you next. Although go to the next slide, because it'll be a similar story. Oh yeah, see, there's construction. Construction has not been in a long-term downturn. That's construction as a share of private sector employment. It's now a little over 6%, whereas private manufacturing is 9%. It can rise for sure. I'm anticipating my point, but it's a little bit about 3 percentage points behind manufacturing, so it isn't as though it's non-existent. But the key point is that it hasn't had the kind of continuous downtrend as a share of private sector employment that manufacturing employment has had. Now, with that said, just to complicate the waters and I guess be a little bit of a right-handed, give me, as Truman famously said, give me a one-handed economist, because they say on the one hand, on the other hand. If we opened it up a little bit more for modular housing manufactured, not on site, but at the plant, and then you shipped it to the site, and then you could sort of, then you did a little bit of on-site fitting of the pieces, it could become more efficient. And there's not enough of that allowed. On the other hand, there's still, it's been in an up and down trend. When it was at its peak, it was up at 66.8%. That's when we had a housing bubble. There's way too many. A lot of houses were built that people couldn't afford, but we are above 6%. So I just wanted to try to ground people in the facts, but now we get into interesting complications. So let's go to the next slide.
All right, can I ask you a little bit of an unfocused ADD question?
Okay, one of those Rob Bernstein questions. Let's do it.
No, and this is really just to kind of thwart the critics here. But in my view, cheaper goods coming into the country creates more opportunities for the kind of jobs we're looking at. For example, construction. I would think that if you're able to import lumber, steel, etc., while we might not have the manufacturing job to make those goods, that then is an opportunity for more profits for someone to go build a house and more jobs for people to go out there and build buildings and that kind of thing. For the critics who think, well, it's really important for us as a country to actually be making those products here, either so that we're not trading with China, not relying on China, or, the misnomer that me and Dave used of actually making things. How do you take that on? Like the idea that, we need to have our own steel supplies or our own steel industry for even, the country's defense, that, we should actually be making the root products. How do you take that on?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, the two parts of that question, Rob. Number one, I tried to show that, just to review, service sector pays better. Service sector tends to be domestically done. There's more and more possibilities of having it done offshore, but it tends to be domestically done. And then on top of that, wants are infinite. We've had a whole series of what I prefer to call, in terms of in homage to my friend Sheldon Richman, not creative destruction that Schumpeter called it, but creative disruption. So therefore, obviously, there is creative disruption when we get cheap goods from abroad. Who does that mainly help? The people who go to Walmart. And the people who go to Walmart are disproportionately people of limited means. So it's been a win-win situation since 2000. And of course, it's been a win-win situation because of greater productivity in manufacturing that's made manufacturing goods cheaper. Durable goods have become cheaper. And so, again, obviously, global trade is good for us, especially good for poor people, because most of what is still traded is goods, cheap goods that people can buy at Walmart. But then, I'm sorry, you had another part to your question. I thought, did I forget? Wasn't there another part to your question?
Yeah, the other part was, what about people that think that it's important basically for us not to be relying on other countries for critical goods such as steel?
Well, I want to pounce and say that the insane parent, I think that basically the people who emphasize the importance of domestically produced steel are probably just stupid. That they're not venal. Because obviously, one of the biggest manufacturers of steel is Brazil. We still manufacture steel fairly significantly in this country alone. And so then we get into the nightmarish idea: are we going to fight another World War II? We're going to need a lot of steel. Well, you and I know that if we start a World War III, it won't last 4 years. It'll probably last 4 hours. We'll just nuke each other, apart from anything else. However, the point is that there are plenty of places in the world. I'm embarrassed that I can only mention Brazil at the moment, which is a major producer of steel. But apart from that, all that the government would have to do is what it did during World War II. Essentially, as you probably know, our domestic industries were simply converted, taken over. They weren't producing cars anymore. They were producing tanks. And so we have plenty of domestic steel that goes into laying railroad track, goes into cars still, goes into the building of skyscrapers. We just have to call a halt to that, and the government would crowd it out. In other words, the government would dominate the purchase of steel and say, just like it did during World War II, no cars were produced in those years, no new cars. It wasn't exactly a good time domestically. No good durable goods were produced. So that would be the same thing. If we had if these lunatics who fantasize that we're gonna fight some kind of world war that will last 4 years, we have plenty of steel. I mean, the other joke is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We're a major producer of oil. We don't need the government to store oil. There's plenty of private inventories of oil, and all that would happen once again is the government would do what it did during World War II, restrict the use of gasoline for cars and crowd out and just buy up all the oil that we do produce. Of course, we have vast potential to produce more, as you know, if only some governor of New York State would allow fracking in northern New York State, but we don't need it for oil either. Now, I'm only mentioning this because once you give those people carte blanche to say about what do we need defensively, you're talking to lunatics who have no sense of reality. Apart from, World War III will last 4 hours. You know that, maybe 8 hours at tops. We won't even be able to get on the phone to buy the oil because obviously, World War III would be with other nuclear powers. So
the idea is
one
essentially
power being Russia, and that would be over in 8 hours. But what were you going to say, Rob?
So it sounds like the idea is essentially we benefit from the free trade because if we can get these items for cheaper, it's the opportunity to then do the next job, which is such as building the cars for less money. And if we're in an environment where we're unable to source these items from another country, that means that we're probably in World War III with them, and then we're not going to need those items because we're nuking each other anyways.
Well, the point is that I want to bend over backwards to grant these dangers. It's just that when I hear otherwise intelligent people say that we need a strategic petroleum reserve, that I know I'm talking to lunatics. Who don't recognize that due to fracking, and if you combine Mexico and Canada, we are completely energy independent, and the government can simply crowd out the oil. Apart from the fact that instead of giving trouble to Venezuela, there's nothing much we can do about their socialist economy. They have more oil than any other country in the world. So therefore, there's plenty of oil, and the old government would just buy it. If you want to go the 9 yards with these lunatics and say that we'll have something like World War III, where we'll need 4 years worth of oil. But I guess they have some point to make about Taiwan dominating microchips. In other words, so I'll bend over backwards and consider that, even though I'd like them to outline what kind of war they're talking about. And obviously you and I would say, I like to, who's the guy? John Mearsheimer. Have you ever listened to him?
Yeah, big fan.
Well, I'm a big fan too, Rob, but I'm a big fan only when he talks about Ukraine and Israel.
Okay, fair enough. I get what you're saying.
Because when he talks about how we need to dominate Asia, we can't allow China to throw its weight around. The two responses I have to him are, number one, the last time China fought a war was in 1979 against the Vietnamese. And they lost. The Vietnamese have a long history of enmity with China. Throw in Japan, throw in India. The idea that China can be a threat to the countries of that region can simply be solved by us are encouraging these countries to form a pact to stop China from throwing its weight around. Apart from that, so therefore, for him to say we need a lot of military, we need to pivot to China, I think he's a warmonger. But second, do you know what else he said? I believe it was to Tucker Carlson. He makes a lot of appearances, but he said that we need a strong military because China spent 100 years not being able to defend itself, and it was kicked around by Japan. Now, how strong a military do we need if you and I, as libertarians, simply say okay, we'll have a government, but we'll have a minarchist government, and how much military do we need to simply defend our borders against attack? That's all we libertarians want. And so he says we need a strong military because China got kicked around, and yet he doesn't grasp that doesn't mean we need $1 trillion budget. It probably means we need a $50 billion budget to defend our borders from attack. That's defense, and that's all we need. And yet he says that we need this huge budget because we don't want to go the way of China. And he doesn't see the difference between the budget required to defend our borders from attack and the budget required to have, 700 bases around the world and get into endless wars? So I really get annoyed with this man, even though we are both huge fans, because everything he said about the genocide in Israel, in Gaza, and everything he said about the insanity of the Ukraine war is insightful and well-informed. But when he starts talking about the military we need, or that we can't encourage Japan, Indonesia, India, Vietnam that kicked their ass. I'm sure I've left out a few other countries to form a pact that would clearly stop the Chinese who haven't fought a war since '79. And every year we learn they're going to, for the last 20 years, they were about to attack Taiwan, and somehow that doesn't happen. Even he admits it would require an amphibious landing that would be very difficult to bring off. So that's where I find that the man has his head up his ass, even though he's brilliant in other ways. I'm astonished. So don't be such a huge fan, Rob. Be a qualified fan of the man.
I've wondered with Mearsheimer, and I don't know if I will, if I've given this enough thought yet to articulate it properly, but maybe you can flesh it out. But instead of being a strong military power and being the strongest that you can force other people around to guarantee your security, I think there's also a mutual destruction of, if you grow through trade and then you rely on each other, of then disrupting the trade to go to war with each other. That seems to me to be a better framework for being able to get along with people. And so what I mean by
of course. The other thing, do you know, Mearsheimer specifically said that he was against allowing China to come into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. He didn't want China to gain any economic advantages. And we talk about what we are competing with China. How are we libertarians competing with China? We're just looking to buy the best stuff for the cheapest price. We are happy about the fact that the people of limited means go to Walmart and buy cheap Chinese goods. Our businesses are potentially competing with businesses in China, even though that's complicated by the fact that Walmart has a huge presence in China, as does McDonald's. And so of course there is some truth in the fact that if trade doesn't happen across borders, then soldiers will, then military will. So of course you're right about that. But when I heard him say that we should not have let China get into the WTO and benefit from world trade and lift 1 billion people when it liberalized its markets in the late 70s, and then it got involved with world trade, and that had a huge positive effect on the living standards of billions of Chinese, I would say, my God, you are morally indifferent to the fate of the poor of this world. If you would have opposed China's membership in the WTO, and that's the other thing he said. So of course you're right. That clearly, you and I are not going to say that active global trade is a decisive deterrent to war. It's not decisive, but it's certainly a factor that inhibits war between nations. And then when we emphasize that China has become our competitor, China has a larger economy than we do, but it also has 4 times the population. And so if you divide the population into its total economy, the average Chinese has a standard of living that's 25% of the average American standard of living. They're still mired in poverty compared to the average American in this country. And so I hope that they quadruple their GDP, and of course with their one-child policy, by the way, they're losing population. They're inhibiting the market liberalization that started in the late 70s, and so I don't actually have a very positive outlook for China over the next 10, 20 years. I think they've screwed themselves up, but I hope I'm wrong. I wish them well. You and I, libertarians, also wish them well. We want to see more market liberalization, not less. And we want to see them involved in world trade. And Mearsheimer doesn't.
All right. So just one last question on this, and then we'll get back to
what is this one last? Oh, okay. Yeah.
The slides at hand.
Yeah.
Are there any critical goods? I know we took a look at steel. We mentioned microchips, but are there any?
Excuse me. Steel is readily obtainable. We produce a lot of it domestically. It's produced in Brazil. There's several other countries where it's produced.
Fair enough.
There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't trade in steel. We don't need steel for World War III.
All right.
I don't know. I can say that apparently we encourage Taiwan to dominate microchips, and so if you want to say that China is going to have an amphibious attack on China on Taiwan, then maybe that's a problem. If we want to be prepared for World War III, although you and I don't really want us to be prepared for World War III, we at most will concede to our critics that, let's even concede the Monroe Doctrine to them. The Monroe Doctrine, which said under President Monroe, drawn up by John Quincy Adams, that we will not allow encroachment into South America, but there was a quid pro quo specifically stated, in return, we will not encroach on your spheres of influence. So even if we just go Monroe Doctrine, that means we shut down, 650 at least of the 700 bases we have around the world. So therefore, and we no longer court needless wars. And so the chances of any kind of real world war where we'll need any of this stuff are too remote to take seriously. That's our position as libertarians.
So let's say if you look at microchips, though, then can you make the argument of that to avoid war, if we were self-reliant in microchips, China could go ahead and take Taiwan, and we'd have a better domestic supply, so it wouldn't be threatening to our economy.
Okay, Rob, I've called these people idiots when they talk about steel and oil.
Yeah.
So I want to be fair to them and give them the benefit of the doubt. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, they're still idiots and warmongers. However, if you want to make that point about microchips, I'll bend over backwards and say, fine, we want to produce our own microchips so they can take Taiwan. Although, as I said, the proper policy for the U.S. would be to quit threatening, would remove our bases from Asia, and at the same time, easily call a meeting of the leaders of Japan, India, Vietnam, which kicked China's ass in 79, Indonesia, all those countries in Asia whose combined might would be a deterrent against China. And the next question to ask them would be, if China attacks Taiwan, would you arm Taiwan in order to defend itself? Now, obviously, it is true clearly that Taiwan it's like Ukraine against Russia. So maybe it's hopeless. On the other hand, I'd have to know a little bit more about it, because even Mearsheimer has said that it would have to be an amphibious attack, and that's a very complicated and very perilous operation. So I don't know what the risks are of that. But my final answer to you, so therefore I would try to say, let's try some other course, and let's recognize that the other countries in Asia are not such pushovers, and that not long ago Japan was slaughtering the Chinese, and so we would say you defend you form an alliance, you'll have mutual interest with all of these countries, and you'll be able to deter China possibly from attacking Taiwan. I probably prefer that, but I'll bend over backwards and agree with you about microchips.
All right.
Yes.
All right. That's the end of my little ADD tangent there, and we can come back to the slides. I think we already, this is the last.
Oh, that was construction.
All right. And so now we have this quote.
I picked up this quote from one of the best informed people on the nature of regulation, and I guess we'll just read it. Complying with regulation costs manufacturers an average of $20,000 per employee per year, twice as great a burden as for other businesses. For the smallest manufacturers, those with fewer than 50 employees, that annual cost is $35,000 per employee per year. In surveys, America's manufacturers routinely rank regulatory burdens as the top impediment to growth. A large majority also say that regulatory burdens are higher in America than in other countries. It's a very well-documented study. And of course, those regulatory burdens are mainly from the green energy movement, of which you're, of course, a shining star, because you don't use your air conditioning or your heating, but you do fly. Okay, all I'm saying, though, is that I'm now throwing a little bit of monkey wrench into my own analysis and saying that, obviously, what Trump was already beginning to do, by the way, by hampering the environmental movement, Trump should look at these regulations, most of which make no sense, and deregulate, and that would probably give manufacturing a boost, more than tariffs, which of course are clearly destructive. And so now, I don't think that even Mark Mills would say, what is it? I looked it up. There's was it 9 million? I had it written down. What do I have? 12.3 million people work in manufacturing. Just 12.3 million versus private sector employment minus manufacturing is 10 times as great. So again, I'm trying to point out that manufacturing pays less. It doesn't pay more. We still make a lot of things. However, the idea that you burden this sector, especially with regulation, which Mark Mills says is essentially the abuse of power by government, that would clearly give manufacturing a shot in the arm, and they could probably gain 1 million or 2 employees. So I think that we should bear that in mind, and that his point was that you don't fight it with tariffs. You fight it with what you do domestically. And of course, Trump doesn't have the attention span to even get through this paragraph. So that's too bad. So therefore, that's the bottom line. If you're concerned about manufacturing, that's the source of your concern, the excessive regulatory burden that manufacturing gets, mainly because of the environmental lunatics.
So the short on that is essentially, if we got rid of all of the compliance laws, you could increase manufacturing by about 20%.
The latter, yeah.
You can increase manufacturing by about 20%.
Let's say, yeah. And again, that's not nothing. We ought to create. Why should we strangle one of our domestic industries? So that's that throws that sort of backs off a little bit from what I was saying earlier. Even though I'm not saying that's going to bring about some major revolution, Mark Mills would of course agree that manufacturing has become more and more efficient over time. It's not going to be 35% of the private sector, but I think that's an important point to make about what is really strangling manufacturing. Now we should get onto housing. That's the biggest one. Now, the best book, it's a comic book, even though crazily enough, it's called an illustrated novel, but it's not a novel. It's nonfiction. Brian Kaplan, you probably encountered, is a brilliant guy. And this is the best informed source on it. It does cover the map. It was endorsed by Ed Glazer, and Glazer pointed out that starting in the 1960s, that's when all of the zoning restrictions began. That prior to that, they were building for poor people. But obviously, we are completely carpet bombed with zoning restrictions that prevent the building of new housing. In certain sections of the country, I believe Palo Alto, you have to build on at least 1 acre of land. You can't subdivide into quarter acres for single family housing. You can't build up, not even in New York can you build up. Lots of rich people like to live in apartments. There's nothing necessarily wrong with them. And so he goes through the full 9 yards on how the restrictions on building, which builders are eager to do, have essentially caused stagnation and consequently soaring costs of rents and soaring costs of houses. And it's easily proven by comparing the actual costs of building versus the price. And the prices are much higher because the regulatory restrictions begin to bite. And of course, in different parts of the country, if you go to places like most of Texas, where building restrictions are much looser, you have far more building and far cheaper housing. And the point I would add to that is that it also exacerbates inequality of income. That's a point that Ed Glazer makes of guys at Harvard, in fact. And so even though I put down Harvard, they got a few good people there. Glazer points out that the very areas where the better paying jobs are the areas like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. The people who can move, who can earn $100,000 or more, can afford the housing. But for people in the $50,000 range, it's a real constraint. And so that's why we have less migration than before. But if they built more, if they lifted the NIMBY, not in my backyard restrictions, then we could have far more building. Supply would then overwhelm demand. And Brian loves to come up with precise numbers that I know Dave likes to make fun of, that housing costs could plummet by 50%. He likes a dramatic number. They could certainly plummet. And as I say, that's restricting income mobility because people have trouble moving to places where the pay is higher. In addition, Brian likes to make the point that men, with all that testosterone, especially that we're going to get from that coffee that I just bought, they don't want to work as nurses and caregivers and wipe old people's asses the way women from the West Indies like to do. And so if we only opened up housing and therefore brought huge opportunities to build for employment, then we could give men with testosterone back the manly jobs. Now, I think he's exaggerating a little bit. It's certainly manly to repair things. We have you, of course, obviously the other service that you go into is just servicing housing, roofing. They require renovation all the time. Well, but in addition to that, just working as a plumber. Now, plumbing, of course, is also locked up to some extent by unions, but there's a lot of manly work that people do in terms of repair, in terms of driving trucks, all of those things. However, Brian is certainly right to point out that men would probably enjoy putting up 90-story buildings, and so that would give them more personal satisfaction in life as well as decent jobs. So that's now. The interesting part of that is that the vast majority of these rules and regs come locally, state and local level. And here I might violate my libertarianism by saying that if Trump is willing to try to threaten India with sanctions, if it keeps buying oil from Russia, and the Indians have told them to stick it up his ass, by the way, they're going to continue to buy oil from Russia, but then it is possible for the federal government, even though this violates our principles of libertarianism, to put pressure on localities to lift their restrictions on the building of new housing, lift their zoning restrictions, and be more like Texas. And so that's another. Even just moral suasion. If Trump simply traveled around the country and put on dog and pony shows about why housing is so expensive in New York and LA and San Francisco, and yet so much cheaper in Texas, I think he could bring about some good results. Again, I'm saying that's a problem because with respect to the regs on manufacturing, that's mainly from the federal government. With respect to the restrictions on building, that's mainly state and local.
It would be a very fun thing to watch liberals reckon with, which would be if you reduce the zoning laws, those people that own homes would both have to have their home values come down and have poorer neighbors. But if you actually care about the ability of people to be able to go out and buy a home and then also have a job of working on building those homes, it sounds like the more practical solution to actually help the poor.
It certainly does, Rob, and it's just another sign of the times that you who don't even believe in global warming are greener than the people who do. But that aside, look, I knew a guy who lived in Palo Alto, and I visited his home, and he was bragging that its market value was up to $1 million. Because I didn't want you know how circumspect I am, Rob. I don't like to insult people, and so I didn't tell him to his face that you are basically a parasite of victimizing poor people. Is only because of the zoning restrictions that this shithole of a house you have. It wasn't a shithole, but it was the sort of house that would have gone for like $200,000 in Texas, $1 million in Palo Alto. It's only because if you profess a progressive, no less, of course, a progressive, you profess to care about people of limited means, then you will campaign against the housing restrictions that have turned your house into a $1 million house. Now, you of course put your finger on the other part of it, which is that it is government restrictions, local government restrictions, and state government restrictions that restrict the building of housing. However, there are certainly schmucks like my friend who's got his $1 million home, who certainly doesn't want to see more building because that's not in his interest to see. So that is a little bit of a knotty problem, but I believe that it's solvable and that people are certainly becoming more aware of the problem, certainly through books like this. And there have indeed been, as a matter of fact, there was a guy I debated named Benjamin Applebaum of the New York Times, who was full of shit in many ways, but he was claiming that the problems of the U.S. economy are all due to capitalism. But he's also been on a tear in his articles for the New York Times about all of these zoning restrictions that drive up the cost of housing. So I read some of those statements, and then I surprised the audience by saying, and all of those statements were written by my debate opponent, Benjamin Applebaum. So clearly, it's not capitalism that's creating that kind of a trouble for people of limited means. It's clearly government intervention that is doing so. But those two problems: the restrictions on manufacturing, the restrictions on building, which have huge ramifications. That should be the focus, not just of libertarians and free market people, but of progressives everywhere. And unfortunately, Trump is not going to listen to this Zero Hedge podcast. Or he probably turned it off, 15 minutes ago. So, yeah.
Fake news. All right. And then the next slide here is the housing affordability index.
Yeah, there. I'm just going to try to bend over backwards to show that that this, by the way, is private sector. See, which is interesting. There are a lot of good private sector sources, and they can expand. The housing affordability index is compiled by taking, actually, I guess using a government source, because the government source would be for median income. So you take median income, and then you take the median price of the home, and then you figure out actually they always stuck with a 20% down payment. So you got a down payment, and you've got to be able to finance the rest of it. And so how affordable is it for you? And they turn that into an index. So clearly, if it's less than 100, then it's less affordable. And so I'm going to point out and grant that, given, of course, all the restrictions on housing, that it's clearly more difficult to buy a home for the average family than it ever was before. Housing, the home ownership rate is at 65% as a share of households. So it's not that low. It's low. It's a few percentage points lower than it used to be. And of course, it's tilted a little bit toward toward those who already own homes, first-time buyers having problems. So I just wanted to make the point that even though I disagree with statements made by some people like you and Dave, that there's nothing but trouble in America, that everybody's holding on by their fingernails. I want to grant that to buy a home, you can see where that is. It's at 90. It's below 100. It's when it was much higher, that was when we had a housing bubble and interest rates were very low. But still, the homes are less affordable, even though I'm bending over backwards to comply with those who continually sing a dirge about where the economy is, even though the kind of house you could buy today, that the median home has many more amenities than it did in the 1970s. It does have air conditioning. It does have heating. It's larger. You're getting more square feet for your money than you did then. And so to some degree, it's not as bad as it seems, because if you're going to buy the same home, the same average home that was available in the 70s, you'd pay a lot less. It would be about half the size. The median home is now about 2,400, 2,500 square feet. It used to be, back in 1970, it used to be about 1,200 or 1,300 square feet. So there are a lot of differences. However, it is true that it's more difficult to buy a home than it ever was. Despite that, but although this chart exaggerates the problem to some extent, if you're going to look for a home that's comparable to the mid-70s, smaller in size at least, then it will be more affordable. That's all I'm saying by that. Just trying to say this is not good news on balance.
I think we've got 2 slides left here. This next
Well,
one
I wanted to just inform people that again that despite all the talk about union membership, union membership is now what was the figure? I wrote it down. I wrote it on the other part of it. It's now down to 5.9%, a record low. This is union membership as a percentage of private wage and salary employment. And so it's plummeted. And so what I'm trying to say then is that a little bit of a digression, but maybe if you read Robert Reich's tweets or other people's tweets, there's been huge push to unionize, and yet it does nothing but fall. And it's fallen to a record low in 2024 of 5.9%. And so therefore, those trends seem so inexorable that it would be very difficult to think in terms of reversing them. And without getting into it too much, the idea that it's because corporations are more powerful, it's because government is restricting it, it's really just workers are just not that interested, despite the left, the I don't like to call it, tell Dave to stop calling it the corporate press. Corporations are not evil. Corporations are fine. Call it the legacy press, the old press. Don't call it the mainstream press. But of course, what you read in the New York Times are usually these anecdotes about how this place has been unionized, that place has been unionized, and yet, as a share of private sector employment, it does nothing but fall. So I thought I would just inform people about that.
All right.
Because it comes up a lot on Twitter. And then, so then, but here's my other point, which you're probably going to scoff at, Rob.
All right.
So have at it. We can take a lot of different measures, but of an indication as to whether people are doing worse than ever or better than ever. I just conceded that if you want to buy the kind of median price home that people buy today, with the Wi-Fi, with the air conditioning, with the central heating, all that, then indeed it's more difficult. But this is the real average hourly earnings of production and non-supervisory workers, people who are at the lower 80%. And so what they earn per hour, and then you can say, well, maybe they don't get in that many hours, all kinds of protests you can make against this, and I could address it. But the point is, the one, if you had to put together a single unit measure, then this is this reduces it all to 1982-84 prices. It uses that price index as of that year. That's why it looks so low. But it's really just a trend. It's just that there was when you always see a spike in those gray areas. Usually see a spike in the gray areas of recession. I see you didn't see it in 90. Gray areas are recessions, and and they spike a bit because the low-paid workers are the ones who get laid off, so they don't enter into the numbers. But if you discount that spike during the lockdown recession, then you find that the average hourly earnings have kept ahead of price inflation. And now I'm going to say something absolutely outrageous, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics problem actually is that it overstates price inflation in general rather than understating it. Now, this doesn't really have the actual cost of buying a home. So that it takes rents, and then takes the imputed cost of being your own landlord. It's that the home component, the housing component, is actually rents, and so it leaves out houses. But if you're renting, as most of these people are, then actually we have kept ahead of price inflation. I've heard Dave say, well, you can get along on $160,000 a year, but less than that, you can't. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people live in much cheaper areas of the country than Dave does. You live in Stamford, Connecticut, an upscale community, Dave, so that's why you're poverty-stricken compared to your neighbors. Dave lives in this sumptuous mansion, I've heard, somewhere in New Jersey.
I wouldn't go that far.
What?
I wouldn't call it a mansion. He's got a nice home, though.
How many rooms?
I've never been invited to the family area upstairs, so I haven't counted. If I had to guess, it's 3 or 4.
Because they're afraid you'll shut off the air conditioning. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And try and save the environment.
They had you over. Okay. All I'm saying is that this is just a reasonable approximation of the fact that most people are doing better than ever, and then if you ask me, and then if you think that the Trump phenomenon proves that people are doing worse than ever, I think there's so many other explanations for the Trump phenomenon. To some degree, of course, there are still people who go to Walmart who aren't aware of the fact that that things are cheaper than ever because of the Walmart revolution and because of Amazon, by the way. The Walmart revolution, which lowered prices, and the Amazon revolution that also lowered prices, the agency at the Bureau of Labor Statistics that tracks this, they weren't equipped to capture that decline. And then they didn't know what to do with smartphones. The smartphone revolution that suddenly meant that you didn't have to buy a flashlight, a camera, a video camera either, a compass. You didn't have to buy anything that a navigator because the smartphone did it all. All of that stuff that brought things that really brought incredible wealth to people. They were unable to give that adequate reflection as well. So that's a few reasons why they tend to overstate price inflation. But all I'm saying is that I'm making the final claim, which is that don't look at the number, just look at the trend. The fact of the matter is that most people are doing somewhat better than ever. Most people are. Based upon this single number, any other number I draw will show that they are, and that the Trump revolution is often cited to indicate that no, people are really suffering, and that's why they rebelled against the Republican Democratic parties. And I would say that there are lots of other reasons why people get fed up by hearing the same pablum from the Dems and Republicans, and why Trump is an unusual figure who knew how to sort of free associate to people and make them recognize that the conventional choices were no longer interesting. We're just putting them to sleep, and Trump kept everybody up. So all I'm saying is that the Trump phenomenon is cited as evidence that everybody's suffering and looking for better material treatment, but I believe that there are alternative explanations. So I just wanted to finish on that by saying that as bad as troubled as the BLS numbers are on any single month, if you look at broad trends, they keep taking the same snapshot every month. And if every month the same snapshot gives you more or less the same results, then you can think that that's why I show the line, the trend. Then the trend is better. The trend is up. Most people are doing better than ever. However, I cited a few examples of how government is hamstringing progress. I could cite 9 other examples about how it's hamstringing progress. We could do far better. We could have 7% growth every year if we just unshackled the economy from the shackles of government.
All right, Gene, this was fantastic. Before I let you go, I'm going to plug Summer Porch Tour, and then we'll plug the Soho Forum.
Bob. Okay, I have a question about these porch tours and about you and Dave.
Sure.
What kind of anti-Semitism is implied in the fact that every time you and Dave announce an appearance, I, who live on 3rd Street, Great Jones off Bowery, 3rd Street, I can't even go to Brooklyn to catch you guys anymore. Why don't you ever come to an area where an old guy like me doesn't? I mean, have you?
Gene, you want to do a porch tour from your living room?
Come to New Jersey. What?
Gene, you want to do a porch tour from your living room?
Okay, but my living room is big, but
you won't even have to leave the house.
I know what do you got against New York, Manhattan, Brooklyn?
I don't know why we haven't done a New York gig in quite a few years. There's really no
find out from Dave and ask Dave to find out from his booking agent. I took an Uber. I had a great time. This will be a memory you'll enjoy, Rob, because I went to Brooklyn. Was it 5 years ago by now? You guys, right, I took an Uber to Brooklyn, and you guys were both appearing. And afterwards, I told Dave, I got interesting news for you that I think, despite yourself, you'll like. Rob Bernstein was somewhat funnier than you were, and you were very funny.
There you go. Well, that's a nice compliment.
That's what I said to him.
I said that was a very nice compliment, and on any given night, I do have the easier spot because I only have to do about 25 to 30, and Dave's got to be funny for a full hour.
I know. I'm trying to always out. So you have higher quality jokes because it's an economic concept. You just have to produce enough jokes.
But on a typical night,
I forget. Those Brooklyn. Dave probably did an hour, and you did a half hour.
Yeah, on a typical night, I don't outclass Dave. It's also a percentage thing. It's like a baseball thing. We probably do 100 shows together a year. And maybe on 15 of it's also subjective. But Dave's a phenomenal comedian, and I'm happy to be able to open for him.
You did better than he did that night. Has that Brooklyn place closed down?
Yeah, recently, which was a shame because that was the only place I still was doing the occasional spot in the city. But anyways, we'll get something lined up this weekend. I'm in St. Louis, Cincinnati, Ohio, Pekin, Indiana, and outside of Cleveland. And Gene, why don't you tell them all about the SOHO Forum and what debates you got coming up?
And anti-Semitically speaking, Rob refuses to appear anywhere in my neighborhood so I can catch him. And then apart from that, I'm having my SOHO Forum, which just completed its 9th year, started in September of 2016, and we had an August debate with Glenn Greenwald arguing the Constitution against Anna Goresh, and that's all of them are on YouTube. We're getting a lot of YouTube hits because, of course, obviously Greenwald is a draw, and of course, when we had Dave, we also had a capacity crowd, and we had to turn people away. We similarly with Greenwald. But this time we sell well, even if we have people who are not unknown. We're having a debate on sex work. There is a group that wants to jail people who pay for sex. If you sell sex, then you don't have to go to jail. But the person who pays for the sex, even if it's a woman buying it from a man or a woman buying it from another man, another woman rather. So we're returning to that debate because those people are worth responding to because they've got an interesting take on the idea of paying for sex work. In November, we're going to revisit the issue of the failure of where was it? Was it in Portland? There was an attempt to completely decriminalize drugs, and now I'm remembering where, and that apparently failed, and that's being used as the test case of consequentialism that we just can't decriminalize drugs. And Zach Weissmuller of Reason is doing a special documentary about that. And so he's going to take the negative in November and defend, in effect, the decriminalization of drugs. And then so that's September, October. November. Did I say November? October is Zach Weissmuller. November, we're having Jason Riley, who's the best disciple of Thomas Sowell, who for the most part is a libertarian, at least when it comes to his economics, and a great read when it comes to economics, Thomas Sowell. Jason Riley is a disciple of his, and he's written a new book about affirmative action, sort of, and how it harms the people it's supposed to help. So he's going to come to the SOHO from November, and in December we're trying to get Lena Khan, who used to be the hatchet person for antitrust under Biden. She's at Columbia, and we're going to try to get her to come in December to defend her point of view. And then the interesting thing about the Soul Forum is we always have to pay progressives more than we pay libertarians because those progressives fear that they're going to get, obviously, their arguments will be in tatters, more or less the way, Scott Horton turned Bill Kristol into a bleeding mess when we had those two. And it was amazing to me, by the way, Bill Kristol, the big neocon, he didn't even charge us more than our flat fee. And I was surprised that he was willing to come. But usually the progressives say no, and then we really have to up the fee in order for them to come because they like money just as much as you and I do, those progressives. So we are offering Lena Khan a 5-figure sum if she would only schlep down from Columbia University, where she's now ensconced, the big antitrust person, and really we get somebody decent to debate her. So that's through December. That's still up in the air, but we have several months. Go on thesohoforum.org, and unlike Rob and Dave, we appear in New York. I know there's a socialist mayor taking over, and that's bad news, but we're on Bleecker Street at the Sheen Center in New York, a 276-seat theater, and we're usually sold out. And then we have a party afterwards. We're trying to build a community, a party at my loft apartment where we can fit in about 100 people. After the show, lots of them go home. But that's where people stick around until about 11 o'clock because we're trying to build a community as well of libertarians in New York, even though it's a left-wing town. We're still fighting for New York, and we hope at the Soul Forum that ultimately Dave and Rob will return somewhere in New York to do their thing because I'd love to watch them live. Those guys are both hilarious.
You're very sweet. All right. Thank you, Gene. This was a pleasure.
Okay. Same here. Bye-bye.